Alrighty folks, and welcome to the Chronicler Podcast channel. Episode 3, Yao, Shun and Yu. Last week, we were talking about Huang Di and how he won the power struggle for the Yellow River Valley. As well as that, we talked about Shunong and how he died doing what he did best, trying herbs, and how the demon Shuryo was now dead. Huang Di did continue on his legacy and died in, well, nobody really knows. And again, like with Shunong's birth, people were more concerned with the spectacle rather than the date. Plus, this is pre-writing history we are talking here. Unless we steal Doctor Who's TARDIS, we will never know specific dates in this time frame. Now the next guy in our story is called Yao. He was born in around 2356 BC in the town of modern-day Linfen, which is in today's Shanxi province. Yao is said to have been a wise ruler, benevolent in everything he did. He always looked to help the people under his rule. He even created the first world's well in Chinese culture. How do I know this? Well, I went to Linfen and I seen the well for myself. It has inscribed on it, the world's first well. Now of course, this is obviously up for debate. I did, after all, see the well that was in the middle of a temple which is dedicated to Yao. Coincidence? Regardless of what you believe, Yao is said to have worked in the fields alongside his subjects, he participated in the hunting and fishing with the locals, and he solved disputes or problems everywhere he went. And this in turn inspired a great deal of loyalty amongst his subjects. But you know, as time passed, Yao started to get older. He needed an heir to the throne. Now one would normally think that this would be his eldest son. However, this was before the era of dynasties and dynastic succession. So Yao actually wanted to bypass his family members, who he deemed as useless, and find the best man for the job in a sort of voluntary abdication system. Yao found his man, Shun, the next guy in our narrative. So what made Shun stand out to Yao? Well, for one, Shun was a classic example of filial piety. So let's talk about him. Now Shun was born in the year 2294 BC. Yep, over 100 years after Yao was born by all accounts. But like I mentioned, all dates are really loose at this time, so please try not to pay too much attention to them. When he was young, his mother died. Some say it was during childbirth, some say it was when he was an infant. But regardless of what you believe, what happens next seems to be the narrative. So his dad remarried, and you better believe it, she was a wicked stepmother, and she also had a son, who was now Shun's stepbrother, and both of them were horrible. So yeah, just think of the ancient Chinese Cinderella story, that's a way to come up. Now it does seem like Shun's father did have a wee bit of wealth, because this seemed to be the only reason this woman was interested in him in the first place. He was an easy target as well, because he was blind. The mother and son started to work almost straight after the wedding ceremony, making Shun do all of the housework, giving his meals to his stepbrother, or certainly feeding Shun a lot less, dressing the stepbrother in the finest clothing while Shun wore rags like a slave. You get the idea. And again, just think of Cinderella. But there won't be a handsome prince with a glass slipper to save the day. This is when we go off course. So as time progressed, they wanted Shun out of the picture completely, and tried several times to assassinate him, but for the sake of time, I will only mention two. So one day, when Shun was doing some work in the fields, his brother approached him, and he said that he needed work done on the roof of the family home. Shun obviously came with him to check it out. Shun's stepbrother then climbed off of the roof, then set the house on fire. So yeah, what happened to Shun? Well, he kind of already knew about the plot, and had another ladder placed on the opposite side of the home out of his brother's sight. So as soon as he could smell the smoke, it was just a case of climbing down the other side. Well done, Shun. Clever play there. The second time is when his stepmother got involved. And again, Shun was doing some housework, probably building a new home for the family. Then suddenly, his mother-in-law came running out, crying that someone had been stuck in the local village well. And no, not Yao's well. And Shun needed to save them. Again, Shun obliged and rushed over to the well, then climbed down. All of a sudden, the well came crashing down on itself, and surely Shun was dead. The stepmother and son must have been dancing with joy at the thought of that. But Shun walked up to them, pretending nothing had happened. So yeah, wait a minute here. How did Shun escape this time? Well, again, he knew about the plot, and he, as well as a few friends, or servants, dug a tunnel towards the bottom of the well. That way, he could simply walk out safely, whilst the well above collapsed. So how did Shun know about these plots? It seems like all of the servants in the family home could overhear the private discussions between the stepmother and son. They were obviously sympathetic towards Shun and told him everything. Now of course, everyone and their pet dog in the village knew the culprits behind this, but Shun forgave them each time. There was no hesitation. So yeah, just remember that classical example of filial piety. This is when it really comes in. Now this was admired by the people around him, and he was an inspiration to everything. For example, whenever Shun went fishing with his friends, they caught a lot more than usual. If Shun participated in a field, they were bigger crop yields. You get the idea. The guy just spread good vibes everywhere. Now of course, Yao took notice, and tested Shun in his hometown. After analysing Shun's way of running government and his policies, it was a no-brainer for Yao. And so, after 70 odd years of rule, Yao married his two daughters off to Shun and proclaimed the new king of the Yellow River Valley. Yao then went to live on for another 20 odd years, after doing this by all accounts. Again, as for dates, there is no date. All I can find was the birth date for Shun, and not the date of when his reign started. So yeah, apologies for that. If anybody does know, then please leave a comment or let me know. I can then make an amendment for next week's podcast. Now Shun reigned very much like he lived his life, with much kindness, and he even gave his stepbrother a role in the government. He continued on Yao's legacy, and shared the burdens of the people, just all in all a great guy. Now however, both Yao and Shun did face one major problem, the Yellow River. Now here we go, we enter the Chinese flood myth story now. So just try and compare this to Noah's Ark, except it's not God punishing everyone for their sins, it's more just a natural disaster and how a hero arises from it. So, during the reign of Yao and Shun, the Yellow River kept on flooding. It displaced the people, it drowned them, it ruined the crops, and just caused all-out mayhem. It was Emperor Yao who appointed a man named Gun to stop the flooding. However, Gun only tried to dam the river, and after 9 years he got himself nowhere. His 9th year ended with the transition of power from Yao to Shun. And let's say Shun was not at all happy with this, so Gun was either executed, exiled, or imprisoned for life, depending on the accounts that you read. This is when our final character steps in, Yu. So Yu was born in 2123 BC and was the son of our unfortunate friend Gun. Yu spent his childhood watching his dad trying to dam the river, and he thought, maybe I could do something different. And this was at a very young age. So when his father died, Shun appointed Yu to stop the river from flooding. This was Yu's time to shine, and his new ideas were implemented immediately. For example, he built canals, dikes, he dredged the river and channeled the river off to new areas. This had two effects. 1. The flooding stopped. Hooray! 2. Water was channeled elsewhere for agricultural exploitation. Now this earned him the saying, Da Yu Zhi Shui, which literally means you the Great. That's right, he's called you the Great now. So it means you the Great controls the water. Now it's not as if this was an easy process. It did take him 13 years to complete it. And legend has it that Yu was so committed to his job that he didn't see his family once during his time battling the floods. He did, however, pass by 3 times. The first time Yu passed by his house, his wife was pregnant, and she ran out to him, crying, begging him to come home, but he refused. The second time he passed by, his wife came out with a baby boy, saying, Come on, come and look at your son. But again, he refused. The third time, his wife and now young son came running out to him, and this is the first time he heard his son speak, and he said, Father, please come back. But fighting back his tears, he refused. Now I know what you're thinking, what a terrible dad. But Yu is rumoured to have said that seeing his family would be his reward after he completed his task, arguing that loads and loads of families had been torn apart by the flooding. So yeah, great leader I guess, but maybe, he needed some coaching on the dad and the husband front. But that's up for speculation. After his triumph over the Yellow River and nature itself, Shun was impressed. So impressed in fact that Yu became Shun's successor. I mean, it was pretty obvious. He did earn the nickname Yu the Great after all. Shun retired and Yu took over. Now again, he continued the legacy of both Yao and Shun and led through example rather than through privilege. When Yu's time was coming to a close, he needed a successor. Now normally, he would have chose the best man for the job, but this time, it didn't happen. Now there are 2 stories as to what happened next. The first, Yu actually chose his successor, a man who helped him battle the Yellow River, but unfortunately, he died. And the nobles at the court favoured Yu's son, Qi, and they had 2 reasons for favouring Yu's son. So the first is that Qi was actually a very competent administrator, and the second would have been that he was so famous considering that his dad ignored him for the first half of his life, and he still turned out to be a noble man. They begged Yu, and finally he relented. So that is the more cheery story. The second story is a little darker. So after Yu chose his successor, Qi secretly had the man killed, and therefore cleared the path to power. So yeah, maybe that was Qi's daddy issues coming into play there, but we'll never know for certain. Regardless of how this happened, all we know is that after Yu died, dynastic succession became the dominant political transfer of power for the next 4,000 years. So yeah, well done. And with that, China's first dynasty was born, the Xia, in the year 2060 BC. So what is a dynasty? A dynasty is a ruling family. So the transition of power goes from father to son, or the oldest male relative within the family. This is significant as it changed the course of Chinese history for the next 4,000 years, like I said earlier. Now of course Yu and Qi didn't know this at the time, but they did alter the course of history. For better or worse, we will never know. Now this is where I will leave things for this week, just because this is kind of the end of an era in Chinese history, as from now we will be looking into dynasties and not just the famous characters. Now I know you're probably thinking, well surely we're out of the time of the myth. But sorry, it is for the most part that the Xia are actually a bit legendary. But that's what we'll talk about next week. So we'll talk about the Xia and what we know of them, and what they are said to have done, and we'll also talk about the characters that came from the Xia, the most noteworthy people. Now I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will see you next time on the Chronicler Podcast channel. Thanks for listening.